Besides supply chain management problems, of course, there is a problem with energy shortages. We talked about it in India, it's there in China, it's there in other parts of the world. So this time you might have Santa Claus traveling because he doesn't need energy. He travels on a reindeer, and reindeer can travel anywhere in the heaven. But he may be a Santa Claus traveling without gifts. So Biden had actually built confidence with the Europeans, which Trump had lost. And now with this Afghanistan deal, that confidence is again eroding, and there is a rift taking place among the Atlantic part. We have seen a response from the Chinese. They have started making sorties of military aircrafts. We have seen very belligerent language from the Chinese. And clearly, it's going to be an open season between China and the West, with Australia being an active partner in that Cold War. But sometimes trade and economic relations have certain autonomy. The Chinese firm is investing in a big way somewhere in northern India in some large project. So, despite all the problems that are going on between China and India, and mind you, I mean the Chinese have invested more than $1 trillion in the US Treasury, and that investment remains intact. But what is interesting is that Iraq is playing a mediatory role between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. I mean, Iraq itself, which was broken in its spirit, in its population, in its society, that Iraq is now bringing together the countries of the Middle East. So there have been a number of elections that took place. All those elections, the result was the right-wing parties were they lost either power if they were already in power, or if they were in opposition, they lost ground. And the electorate gave kind of an unstable support to the centrist forces. So politics has moved to the center.
Welcome to the third edition of the World in 2021 podcast, where I spend time with talking to Sundeep Waslekar, president of the Strategic Foresight Group, a leading think tank which advises governments around the world. Every quarter this year, we've been kind of spending time with Sundeep to try and kind of unpack some of the important global events that are shaping our world this year. And this time, we're going to look at what happened in July to September, that quarter, and beyond, of course, with Sundeep. So without much ado, hello and welcome, Sundeep. How are you?
Hi, Inderjit. How are you?
All well, Sundeep. I know for the benefit of the listeners, I just thought I'd let them know that you're back from a global travel after a fairly long period, I believe. How did that go and where were you?
You know, it was after a gap of 19 months that I stepped out of my house, I stepped out of my city and directly on a plane. So I was in Europe on work, and it was quite exciting, of course, to be out there in the field again after such a long gap. Sure. But it was interesting. Like, one of the issues I want to discuss with you is the whole supply chain management crisis that the world is facing and the logistical problems associated with that. And I experienced that firsthand. Even though my trip was overall very bright and nice and interesting, I saw that at the airports in Europe, particularly Paris and Geneva, to a lesser degree Frankfurt as well, there are a lot of logistical problems.
Yes.
It's very visible.
Yes.
A colleague of mine lost her bag. It was misplaced just on a short flight from Paris to Geneva. A lot of other people on the flight lost their bags. When we arrived in Paris, the bags came just far too late. And everywhere the ground problems were just far too many. The passenger traffic is quite smooth, but the goods traffic, the bags and logistics, it's very clear demonstration of the wider supply chain management problems that the world is facing.
Sandeep, that's being talked about a lot. I mean, the global supply chain disruption that you speak about, it's kind of roiling economies around the world, particularly in Europe, where you were there. I've been hearing that same refrain from friends there. So that's certainly something which is going to be worth talking about. What else caught your attention this quarter that might have significant implications for the world in which we live, Sandeep? Just a brief summary to start with.
Right. I mean, besides supply chain management problems, of course, there's a whole lot of problem with energy shortages. We talked about it in India. It's there in China. It's there in other parts of the world. Then, of course, one of the biggest geopolitical developments that took place in the last quarter was the US pullout from Afghanistan.
Yes.
And that has a lot of implications. And even more significant, the submarine deal between the United States, UK, and Australia, known as AUKUS.
Yes.
And this has very big geostrategic implications, and that also uh, uh, kind of indicates a continued hostility between the West and China, which is a subject that we have been talking about
Yes.
ever since the beginning of this year.
And Sandeep,
And this has
getting a
more or
little
less become
scary as well. Yeah.
Sorry?
It's getting scary as well.
It's getting scary also, and it's become a permanent feature now of any geopolitical discourse. So that was there. There have been, lot of talk about the collapse of Afghanistan, but there has been a big collapse of Lebanon also. So governance is really proving to be a problem. On the other hand, something interesting is happening is that the election results in the last quarter show a movement towards the center from far right. There were elections in Germany, in Canada, in Norway. There are protests in Brazil. So the political movement seems to be going close to the center, not to the left, but to the center, maybe slightly a few ounces left of center, but towards the center.
We should try and kind of unpack that and make sense of it. That'll be very interesting, given the fact that you did a podcast on that as well a couple of years ago, which was very interesting and did extremely well with our listeners.
Exactly. But I must tell you, my favorite development of the last quarter was not any of these. It was this whole new intriguing development about the radio signals, which are coming from the area around Proxima Centauri, the nearest solar system in our galaxy. It's 4 light years away, and it has really exploded the scientific community. There are some strange radio signals have been coming, and they have led to the speculation that maybe they are coming from another civilization. But there is no proof of that so far. Still, scientists believe that there is a more than 99% possibility that this could be coming from a military satellite or something that we have not been able to detect. But these radio signals are very strange. They are not meeting with any of the established criteria, and deep scientific investigations are taking place. And I'm really keen to know what comes out of it. Whether they are really from the Earth, just something that's made by human, whether military satellites or something else. Because earlier also there was a speculation about radio signals, and it turned out to be in the end some strange radio signals, and it turned out to be in the end signals coming from some microwave that had been broken and was sending strange signals into the universe. So we don't know. But if they are actually coming from another civilization or another technological reality in the universe, that would be perhaps the biggest event that will occupy the media at that time, whenever it's proved.
Yes, sounds fascinating, Sandeep, as always. So we've got a packed calendar of things to discuss today. So I'll start with the first one on the global supply chain disruption and the energy shortage, both of which have their own significant kind of implications for the world. Do you want to kind of unpack what you're seeing?
These supply chain management problems are there everywhere now. they are most visible on television in UK, because you see those truck drivers going on strike, and the shelves of the Sainsbury's and Marks and Spencer and other big shops in UK being empty, and the whole talk about the British residents may not really be able to buy gifts for
Yes.
Christmas this year, and some of them are already buying whatever is there in the market. But they are not just limited to UK. They are global. They involve China. They involve the United States. I heard from many of my friends in the export community in India. They are affected by this, by containers, by ships not stopping in Mumbai, the earlier ones which regularly used to stop, and the container prices going up. So they are everywhere, and we hear about the labor shortages in the transport sector in the UK, but there are major labor shortages in the transport sector, especially with truck drivers in the United States, in Los Angeles, which is the biggest port in North America.
Yes.
There are ships just waiting with containers, which are unloaded in the ocean, and they don't know what to do. And for days and weeks, the ships are there. And
Yes.
so the labor shortage is one aspect in the transport sector. The other aspect is that computer chips, they are not available, and therefore some appliances cannot be manufactured. Automobiles manufacturing schedules are getting delayed. So that's the other aspect. The third aspect is energy shortage, particularly in China, which has closed down factories, and that has led to the stoppage of supply of some of the ingredients. So these supply chain problems are all around. They are coming from labor market, energy market, ingredients from everywhere. And what has happened is that entrepreneurs, industry leaders are not really able to manage the demand and supply projections. The demand went up as the pandemic went down, uh, and they were not really able to respond to this upsurge in demand. And I think there is a lot of confusion, and people are trying to find solutions. And I don't know how long these problems will last. I'm not a great expert in this. Experts say that these problems will definitely affect the Christmas of 22. That
Yes.
is something that a lot of the experts seem to have a consensus on. So this time you might have Santa Claus traveling, because he doesn't need energy. He travels on a reindeer, and reindeer can travel anywhere in the heaven. But he may be a Santa Claus traveling without gifts.
Well said. No, so this could obviously impact any kind of economic rebound that we were hoping post COVID. And this is a bit, I should say, unexpected as well. So we'd have to keep an eye out on how this plays out, Sandeep. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I just wanted to quickly now shift the gaze to the pullout you spoke about of out of Afghanistan, which we briefly spoke about in the second edition of the World in 21 podcast as well. What are you kind of making of the evolving situation in Afghanistan, and what does this mean for India as well, Sandeep?
No, before we talk about Afghanistan, I just want to have a word about the energy shortages,
Okay.
because they create a big problem. You have coal shortages, and so there is a big rush to start the coal plants and move the coal from the mines to the plants. But this is going against the plans for greening the economy or greening the energy. So these energy shortages are not ordinary energy shortages. They are challenging the whole plans of the big economies to green their energy base. So it's going to be really interesting how they manage it. I mean, one side you do want to get rid of coal, on the other side you are rushing to start the coal plants, because otherwise your industry is not going to move.
That's right.
So it's not just limited to energy. It's also related to the whole
Choices.
challenge of
Yeah.
climate change and
Yes.
the response to climate change. And so that will be something very interesting to watch. Now on Afghanistan, uh, the first impact of Afghanistan is that there is a lack of confidence in the US that is there very visible in Europe and among the American allies. Uh, because the NATO summit took place in June, which was just the last quarter. And we didn't talk about Afghanistan in the context of the NATO summit. And nobody talked. No, I mean, in the NATO declaration, there was just a small para given to Afghanistan. And the Americans didn't warn their NATO allies that they were pulling out or in what manner they would be pulling out.
But
And
Sandeep, wasn't
suddenly,
that
within
known, really, that it was on the cards?
well, at least it was not discussed. I mean, if it
Okay.
was just
Okay.
formally mentioned, it's possible.
Yeah.
But there was no discussion
Got it.
on how to manage
Manage
it
the
and how
pullout. Okay.
what kind of coordination is required between the two countries. So I know from European capitals that they are very upset with the Americans. Um, and so much so that this combined with the other development we'll discuss separately, the submarine deal with Australia.
Yes.
There is now a thinking going on out of anger. I don't think it's very practical to have an independent European defense command and not depend on NATO. So there is.
Pretty
So Biden had
significant.
actually built confidence with the Europeans, which Trump had lost, and now with this Afghanistan deal, that confidence is again eroding, and there is a rift taking place among the Atlantic partners. India is, of course, affected badly because we had invested more than $1 billion in a very constructive kind of uh, investment in dams, in a parliament building, in hospital. So things which were really useful for the society. And now we don't know what's going to happen to all that investment. And at least the returns are zero, even if the investment is protected by the Taliban. But the entire idea was to develop a relationship with the Afghan people to win their confidence. And with Taliban in power, that is gone. We are not even sure what will happen to some of the projects in which we had invested because one of them was parliament, and Taliban have no respect for democratic institutions. So for us, it's a big shock. It is also quite known that Taliban are controlled by the Pakistani military and Pakistani intelligence, and so definitely the installation of Taliban regime in Kabul is a big big strain for Pakistan, and that in the regional politics is not a good news for India. Uh, but beyond India and beyond the Pakistani control over Taliban, the world has really got confused. They don't know how to handle, how to respond
Yeah.
to Taliban's rise. On the one hand, no country is ready to recognize the Taliban government. There are few who have made a few noises here and there. Qatar, of course, is working, giving a full platform to the Taliban and
Sure.
being a mediator between Taliban and the rest of the world. But basically, the world is confused. They don't want to recognize Taliban. At the same time, they say if they don't deal with Taliban, there are going to be humanitarian crises.
Yes.
There is a huge amount of hunger,
Yes.
shortage of healthcare, and so money has to go. And already the international community has decided to put in more than $1 billion. Uh, so how do you ensure that money is really going to go where it is meant to go? And they are saying they will not give it to the government. They will do it through Red Cross and other international organizations. But all these things, we have to see what happens. So definitely this incident has created a big confusion in the world, be it of a political loss for India and an unexpected a schism between the US and its allies in Europe.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And Sandeep, we're also heading next week into another round of talks in Moscow, which India has been invited to be part of with the Taliban. What do you make of that?
I think India is, like the rest of the world and many of the Western countries, is not sure how to handle Taliban because you don't want to recognize them, you don't want to talk with them. But recently, the Americans and Europeans had talks with the Taliban. So India probably has decided to talk with them, and India also has talked with Taliban on the evacuation issue. So we probably decided that we need to talk with them on some practical things. India took a stand at the G20 meeting that we should provide humanitarian um, support for the affected people, the vulnerable people of the Taliban. So India is also trying to kind of nuance its policy, and it's part of that they decided to engage.
Got it. Got it. The anger that you spoke of a little while ago, directed against the Americans for not discussing the Afghanistan pullout, and the possibility, maybe not practical, but the possibility of a separate, kind of
European Defense Command.
is very interesting, because that also ties in with the other point you were making about the nuclear submarine deal with Australia. Just walk us through how those two are connected, and why that kind of it could emerge as an important event.
Indrajit, there was a commercial agreement between France and Australia.
Right.
France had agreed to supply Australians conventional submarines. And this was going on. They were having the normal commercial disputes about the scheduling and about some technical issues. But this happened between any vendor and recipient. When there is a large deal which is highly complex, involves high technology. So this was going on, and in the middle of all this, France and UK, which are the NATO allies, US and UK, which are the not NATO allies of France, suddenly made a deal with Australia without warning France in advance to supply nuclear powered submarines. And they informed France on the day the deal was signed. So this has really made French very angry. I was in France just recently, and I interacted with many policymakers and opinion makers in France, and there is a massive anger among the French elite about the Americans. And basically, they are looking at the Americans as a nation that cannot be trusted anymore after this deal. There's a huge anger. But the Americans obviously knew that the French will be angry. Perhaps they didn't anticipate the degree to which they could be angry, and they decided to discount it. So for them, this deal was more important than the potential French anger. And this will now have another implication outside of Europe and France and bilateral relations between the US and the European partners in the Pacific.
Yes.
This will intensify the strategic competition between China and the West, with Australia joining that competition. And we have seen a response from the Chinese immediately. They have started making sorties of military aircrafts in the air zone, not belonging to Taiwan, but bordering the air zone belonging to Taiwan, as a kind of warning that they don't care a damn. We have seen very belligerent language from the Chinese coming, and clearly it's going to be an open season with much increase in hostility between and the Cold War between China and the West, with Australia being an active partner in that Cold War.
Sundeep, you had spoken about this briefly the last time we spoke in this World in 2021 podcast itself, that you see American redeploying its military resources around the world to now directly counter China. Would it be fair to say that this is the first manifestation of that?
Indeed, I agree with you, Indrajit. This is a very major manifestation of that. But what the Americans have done is they have leaked the news to the world media, revealing that they have been training the military in Taiwan for the last 1 year. So they have started that redeployment long ago, and they have started, leaking some of the news to the international media now, from time to time, as part of the Psy war. the psychological war between the West and the Chinese. And in every quarter, when we discuss our geopolitical issues, uh, last three occasions we have been talking about the China-US Cold War, and again we are coming back to that subject. And each time the intensity of that Cold War is increasing. And with this Australian deal, it's called AUKUS. It's now a lot more. But I won't be surprised if we discuss the Cold War between these two big powers a quarter from now, and the intensity is even much greater at that time than it is today.
But Sandeep, I recall briefly that you had said that the Chinese strengths in both the Indian Ocean and the Pacific cannot be underestimated. They're pretty formidable, and the US, frankly, even if they do try, may not necessarily be able to match it. Is this deal a rebalancing of any sort, or how should one look at it?
It's very difficult to decide on balance who is stronger, US or China, in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. But the Chinese have certain strengths to target the US naval assets in the Pacific particularly,
Right.
and to a lesser degree even the Indian Ocean. I won't say this deal is balancing that. I think it's just part of the continued game
Got it.
to strengthen the Western position in the Pacific.
Yeah.
It's not. It's something very significant in a sense. It inducts Australia in the Cold War, and Australia's position vis-a-vis China, geographical position, makes it very very significant. But I won't say that this is the only game changer. There will be a lot more to come.
I see. So just one last question on this before we move to other important issues. China is a very, very critical trade partner for the Australians, as they are to us, because they're a significant trade partner. So in a situation like this, it is not entirely clear to me and several others what Australia is doing and why they're doing this to provoke the Chinese. How does one read this shifting the sands in this kind of a relationship?
Just before this deal was announced, Indrajit, there was a trade dispute also, or a talk about a trade dispute between China and Australia.
Right.
So, but despite these verbal disputes, China will continue to be an important trade partner for Australia, and there will be now implications for trade. As there will be, implications for trade between India and China, but sometimes trade and economic relations have certain autonomy. Like I just read in the media, I don't know the details, that the Chinese firm is investing in a big way somewhere in northern India in some large project. So, despite all the problems that are going on between China and India,
yes,
and mind you, I mean the Chinese have invested more than $1 trillion in the US Treasury, and that investment remains intact. And the Chinese, besides the investment in the US Treasury bills, there are huge investments made in the US. And this whole thing about supply chain management problem in Los Angeles port that we are talking about, it is really about a US-China trade. It's the goods coming from China which are on in the containers in the port outside Los Angeles. So on the one hand, you have this big fight between US and China. On the other hand, you have the Los Angeles port congested with the Chinese goods sitting in the containers. So so there is a bit of a economic autonomy so far.
Right.
So far, we have to see how it goes. This is the space we need to watch. There is a desire in the West to try to get some economic independence from the Chinese, but the relations, not only in trade but also in investments and in finance, are extremely interlinked.
Yes, although there have been some reports of US firms now starting to pull out from China. LinkedIn was the last one which is now owned by Microsoft, of course, announced that last week that they were pulling out of China, saying that citing difficulties in operating out of the country. So we will keep looking at this space with you, Sundeep. Clearly, I mean, this is taking on much more serious dimensions when we started first discussing it in November last year. Right. So we'll come back to it certainly again. I wanted to just shift the conversation to another theater where a humanitarian crisis is brewing, and you spoke about Afghanistan. It's also the case that Lebanon is kind of on the brink of a precipice of sorts. Tell us what your reading of the situation there is, and very quickly, and also what implications it might have for the world and that region.
Lebanon, there is a state collapse. They're just not able to form a government. You remember there was a blast in the Beirut port some year ago?
Yes.
Maybe more than a year ago or so.
Yes.
And that created huge anger in Lebanon. And the government at that time had to resign. And they haven't simply been able to form another government. And now, there are economic crises. And so long as there were economic crises, they thought the economic managers could manage them with a caretaker government. But now there are also conflicts between communities. There have been fights between armed groups, Muslims and Christians.
Yes.
And so things are really going out of control, and the economic situation is horrible. I have been to Lebanon several times, and it's a beautiful country. It used to be known as the Paris of the Middle East once upon a time.
Yes.
So it's a beautiful country, and the Lebanese people are fun-loving people. And sorry, and I always used to say that Lebanese people like to party and dance and talk about the next war, but and now they are not so much talking about the next war, but it's a case of internal collapse. But there is another interesting development happening in the Middle East, since we are talking about Lebanon. Nearby Iraq, which is again a failed state,
yes,
it's playing a very, very, very significant diplomatic role. First of all, Iraq had elections last week,
yes,
which were organized very smoothly. Now, we don't know who will form the government and what kind of coalition will come to power. It's a different issue altogether. But what is interesting is that Iraq is playing a mediatory role between Saudi Arabia and Iran,
right,
between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, between Turkey and Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And so Iraq is emerging. I mean, Iraq itself, which was broken inside it, in its spirit, in its population, in its society, that Iraq is now bringing together the countries of the Middle East by playing a diplomatic mastermind that I could have frankly never imagined at all. And they organized a big peace conference in Baghdad a couple of months ago. And they were all there. Jordan King was there, the Saudi leadership was there, the Iranian leadership was there, and they were all talking to each other. And now Saudi-Iran talks have gone through 3 rounds at least with Iraqi mediation. Right. So this is really amazing development that's taking place. So you have a failed state like Afghanistan, which the world doesn't know what to do. You have a failed state like Lebanon, which the Lebanese don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And then you have a failed state like Iraq, which has emerged from its internal schisms and internal failure to become the grand diplomatic mastermind of the entire Middle East.
Sundeep, what explains that? To your mind,
I have no clue. This is this has come as a total surprise.
Okay. Okay. But the Saudi-Iranian conversation on the dialogue is important and strategic, I'm sure.
And it will, and it will change the map of the Middle East. Okay. Because the last decade or two has been primarily characterized by a hostility between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And now if the two countries are coming together with Iraqi mediation, and if they succeed, still they are discussing peripheral issues from whatever I know about their discussions, they are still talking about. But they discuss Yemen, for instance, in one of their meetings, and they're discussing the regional issues. But if they can find a solution to their bilateral problems, and if they decide to create a region where they can coexist with peace and with maybe a healthy competition or no competition, this will change the Middle East completely. And this is not happening with American mediation. This is happening with the Iraqis.
Yeah.
And that is amazing. Maybe the Saudis and the Iranians found Iraqi. I don't know. Maybe the Iraqis offered their good offices, and the Saudis and the Iranians decided to take upon it. Remember this Iranian intelligence ship Soleimani, who was killed
Yes.
by the Americans
Yes.
sometime back,
Yes.
which was a major assassination
Of course.
by the Americans. So he was in Baghdad at that time when he was killed, when he was targeted, to start the Saudi Iranian secret dialogue between the two intelligence
Very
agencies,
interesting.
hosted by the Iraqis.
Hmm.
And I thought his killing will
Yes, setback.
sabotage the talks also, but that didn't happen. Maybe they got delayed a little bit, but now they are in full swing. So Middle East is going in a positive direction for a change.
Very interesting. And the Turks are also involved in some form or the
And
other?
the Turks are also involved in that. Jordan is involved. Everybody is involved.
I see. I see. Very, very interesting. So we'll look at that. The other big shift that you had spoken about right at the start was the political winds and how they're kind of shifting around the world from your prism, from far right, towards the center. Just walk us through what you're seeing and what they mean or what they signal.
Well, in the last quarter, energy, the number of election results came out. Germany, most significant, when Angela Merkel stepped down. There were elections in Norway, there were elections in Canada. I don't know why Justin Trudeau called for the elections, but anyway, he did. So there have been a number of elections that took place. And in all those elections, the result was the right-wing parties where they lost either power if they were already in power, or if they were in opposition, they lost ground. And the electorate gave kind of an unstable support to the centrist forces. So politics has moved to the center. So Germany has moved to the center from being under the Christian Democrat rule for almost 20 years. But of course, Christian Democrat under Angela Merkel cannot be called right wing. It was more like right of center. But now they have moved slightly left of center. So that is one. Norway has moved again marginally left of center. In Canada, they were thinking that the conservatives will displace Justin Trudeau. But again, Justin Trudeau is in power now with the help of left-wing parties in the parliament. So, the balance has moved to the center, not to the left, to the center, but slightly left of center. It's a very unstable balance. But there is a move to the center from the far right that was there. If you remember, 2 years ago, we were discussing the right of nationalism and the rise of far right around the world. And at that time, it looked like the right might be might for a decade or for many years to come. But already in parts of the world, we are seeing this move towards the center. In fact, for that matter, if you look at the last November's US elections and the victory of Joe Biden with Kamala Harris as his vice president, it's also a move towards center. It's not a move towards left. It's definitely, but it's definitely a move away from Trumpism and to the center. Center, maybe little right of center or little left of center, but it's very much center. So starting with the US elections, Canadian elections, German elections, you have this move towards center that's happening. And then outside the election rings, you also have very clear indications of lack of popularity of the right-wing forces. So Boris Johnson is losing his popularity in Britain. People are getting really fed up with the results of Brexit. They think that Brexit has been a disaster. And these supply chain management problems you started with is also very closely linked to Brexit as far as Britain is concerned, not for the rest
Right.
of the world.
Right.
But of course, in Britain, they are less to do with COVID and everything else, and they are more to do with Brexit. In Brazil, Bolsonaro is losing his popularity, and he's facing demonstrations every day. Uh, so, uh, so there is a move that is very subtly happening towards what I would call an unstable center.
Hmm. Very interesting, Sandeep. But implications for India, if at all, we're still um, hitched a bandwagon to the right. And it's difficult to say which way the political winds are blowing, despite the farmers' agitation and all of that being there. But as we always do, Sandeep, towards the end of the podcast, you also kind of um, talk to our listeners about what to watch out for in the next few weeks, months. Any things that you'd like to suggest that people keep their eyes peeled to in terms of important developments?
I think one big thing that's happening in the next quarter is the COP26 conference.
Okay.
This is the big climate conference that happens every year. It didn't take place last year because of COVID,
Yes.
and this time it's happening in Glasgow, I think, in Scotland.
Yes.
And we have to see what comes out of it, because in 2015 in Paris COP, they made big commitments to transfer $100 billion every year to the developing countries to be able to develop the renewable energy
Right.
and the technologies required for renewable energy. That hasn't happened. I think altogether only $20 billion have been transferred in the last 5 years instead of $100 billion per year. So let us see if COP26 is able to revise that or not.
And Sandeep, we're talking about China not participating. Am I correct on that? Or
no, I haven't heard of that.
Okay. Okay. There
No,
was, I was reading
there was
something.
a talk about Australia not participating,
Okay.
but the Australian Prime Minister has decided to go under public pressure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and also it's interesting that by the time this COP26 is happening, just now we talked about elections in different countries,
Yes. Yes.
and while the main result has been the move to the center,
Yes.
in all those countries, the Green parties have won with very substantial votes.
Very interesting.
So that's very significant.
Yeah.
So I would say that COP26 and the whole environmental politics
Yes.
and this energy demand and the push for opening coal-fired plants at a time when there is a demand to close them, uh, but at the same time the need to open them because of the energy shortages. So how are they going to manage? So COP26 and the politics around it and the new developments in energy, I think that would be the star event of or development of the next quarter. And I would very much uh, uh, see what comes out of it. There are new initiatives being launched at COP26 from Africa. They are launching a Congo Basin Blue Fund to shift the basis of livelihood from deforestation to rivers in 10 countries of Africa. And there are a number of other initiatives that
Sure.
would be launched at COP26. So,
Sure.
so we will see what.
And Sandeep, in our own neighborhood, any things that something that we should be watching out for in the next couple of months, at least 3 months?
No, Afghanistan, of course, will be an
Of
ongoing
course.
story.
Of course.
It used to be a side story, but now it's moved to the center stage.
Yes.
So we will see what happens, how the world deals with Afghanistan in the next quarter. If the mullahs give in at all, but they are showing no sign of any kind of compromise in the way they want to treat their own women and girl children. Uh, uh, so we have to see what happens in Afghanistan.
Right.
But otherwise, nothing much. I think it's going to be a fairly routine
and the
quarter in South
Chinese
Asia.
tensions on the border, do you see that kind of ratcheting up, or will they continue to?
I don't think so. I mean, the borders both with China and Pakistan, they will be live at times and they will be quiet at times. And
Got it.
it's just become a way of life now for the state of India. So, but it has been like this for many years, and I don't think anything dramatic will happen. I mean, if something does happen, then that will be the news, of course.
Yes, of course. No, so thank you so much, Sundeep. I know you're again starting to travel next week, and I'm hoping that you'll bring us some very, very interesting stories of what's playing out around the world as always. So thank you very much, and wish you safe travels.
Thank you, Inderjit. It's been a pleasure. It's been a very interesting quarter,
Yes.
and you asked me about the next quarter. You know what I personally want to look forward to
Right.
finding out is what's going to happen to that radio signal.
Radio signal. Yes. I know. Science news is always exciting, especially of this kind. So let's see what happens if there are aliens
Yeah, what they find
at
out.
work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
See you. Take care. Bye. Thank you.